Yes.
And what did you observe during that external examination?
The external examination of Kora, I saw evidence of medical intervention. She was intubated, had various EKG pads and defibrillator pads on her body. She also had a catheter on her right to apply external force to the neck or compress the neck. And a furrow is simply the pattern of injury that develops underneath the site of compression. So for Kora, her ligature furrow consisted of a linear, horizontally oriented area of pallor.
Before we get into the testimony, pay close attention to what is happening here, because this is not simply a routine medical examination being described in court. The witness is a forensic medical examiner walking the court through an autopsy and, more importantly, through the physical evidence observed on Kora Clansancy's body. The testimony begins with the basic procedure, document review, external examination, and identification of medical interventions, but it quickly moves into something far more serious: documented trauma involving the neck and head. We hear about emergency treatment, including intubation, EKG and defibrillator pads, for access, and an intraosseous catheter, all of which help establish the medical circumstances surrounding the examination. Then the testimony turns to the injuries themselves. The examiner describes a ligature furrow around the neck, including its shape, orientation, abrasions, and bruising. That terminology may sound technical, but every detail matters in a courtroom because the physical findings are part of the evidence the jury must evaluate. And notice something important. The examiner is not simply saying that an injury existed. They are explaining exactly what the injury looked like and what forensic terminology means. That distinction can become critical when attorneys are trying to connect medical findings to the events surrounding a death. So as you listen, ask yourself, what can these physical findings actually establish, and what conclusions would require additional evidence? The court is about to dig deeper into those questions, and just as the testimony starts moving toward the next issue, the judge unexpectedly calls for a break. Keep watching, because the details introduced before that recess are likely to shape how the rest of this testimony is understood.
And did you perform an autopsy on Kora Clancy on January 25th, 2023?
Yes.
And did you follow that same process with Kora Clancy?
Yes.
And so that started with a document review, is that correct?
Yes.
And what type of documents are you reviewing when you do that?
Typically, I have a preliminary police report to review, as well as either EMS records or records from the emergency department.
And did you start with an external examination of Kora?
Yes.
And what did you observe during that external examination?
The external examination of Kora, I saw evidence of medical intervention. She was intubated, had various EKG pads and defibrillator pads on her body. She also had a catheter on her right hand and puncture sites on her left hand and her left groin. She had her neck stabilized with a cervical collar, and she had an intraosseous catheter, which is a type of IV that they put directly into the bone on her right lower leg. Her hands at the time of my external examination were covered by police evidence bags, and they were secured at the wrist with tape. When I removed those, the fingers showed no evidence of injury, and the fingernails were all of equal length and intact. And then I noted evidence of trauma of the neck with associated injuries of her head and minor injuries of her right arm and of her legs as well.
And in terms of the injuries that you observed, evidence of trauma to her neck, were there also injuries to her face and neck area that seemed to go along with the trauma to her neck?
Yes, there were findings of the head that were associated with the trauma of the neck.
And what were those?
So on her neck, she had a ligature furrow. A ligature is an object used to apply external force to the neck or compress the neck, and a furrow is simply the pattern of injury that develops underneath the site of compression. So for Kora, her ligature furrow consisted of a linear, horizontally oriented area of pallor or paleness around her neck with distinct superior and inferior edges. On the front part of her neck, the lower half of the ligature furrow was associated with additional red abrasions ranging from 1 to 2 millimeters in size. And on the back of her neck, the superior and inferior edges of the ligature furrow had developed some linear bruising as well.
And what do you mean by a furrow?
So again, the furrow is a ligature is when you have external compression by an object on the neck, and a furrow is simply a pattern of injury that occurs beneath it. It can be an imprint, it could be a pattern, or it could be more developed types of injuries such as bruising or abrasions.
This is the point where the medical terminology becomes especially important. The examiner has carefully distinguished between a ligature and a ligature furrow. A ligature is the object or mechanism used to apply external force to the neck, while the furrow refers to the resulting pattern or injury beneath that compression. That distinction matters because the witness is describing observable findings rather than simply offering a vague conclusion. The testimony identifies a horizontally oriented area of paleness around the neck, distinct upper and lower edges, red abrasions on the front portion, and linear bruising toward the back. Those details give the court a physical description that can later be considered alongside other evidence in the case. Another detail worth noticing is that the examiner also documented medical intervention. The body showed evidence of emergency treatment, and the hands had been covered with police evidence bags before the examination. None of those facts, standing alone, tells the entire story. They are pieces of a larger evidentiary picture. This is why courtroom testimony can sound methodical even when the underlying subject is incredibly emotional. The witness is building a record, detail by detail. And here's the question for viewers. When you hear forensic evidence presented this specifically, do you find the technical detail persuasive, or do you think the surrounding circumstances are just as important as the physical findings?
And what about injuries?
All right, counsel, we're going to take a break this time, all right?
All right. Sure, close your notebooks. Place them on the chairs, please. This way, please.
And then, just as the questioning is about to move into another area of injury, the judge stops the proceedings. That abrupt interruption is worth noting because courtroom schedules are not always as smooth as they appear on television. The judge tells everyone to close their notebooks and place them on the chairs, then announces a short recess while the court speaks with counsel about scheduling. In other words, there is no ruling here, no new finding from the judge, and no indication in this excerpt that the testimony has been rejected or challenged. The proceedings are simply being paused. That distinction is important because dramatic courtroom edits can sometimes make an ordinary procedural break feel like a major development. Based strictly on this transcript, the significant substance came from the forensic testimony immediately before the recess. The examiner described medical intervention, documented injuries, and explained the meaning of a ligature furrow. The next portion of the proceedings would therefore be important because the questioning had not yet finished exploring the injuries. So what do you think comes next? More detailed forensic evidence, questions about how those injuries occurred, or a challenge to the examiner's interpretation? The transcript gives us a pause here, but the evidence introduced before that pause is clearly setting up the next stage of the examination.
We're going to recess for a few minutes. I'm going to come back. We'll speak to counsel in regards to schedule. Okay. Thank you.
To recap what this portion of the courtroom testimony establishes, the forensic examiner described the process used during the examination of Kora Clansancy, beginning with a review of available records and continuing with an external examination of the body. The witness documented evidence of medical intervention, including intubation, EKG and defibrillator pads, catheter access, puncture sites, cervical stabilization, and an intraosseous catheter. The examiner also described the condition of the hands, including the presence of police evidence bags, and then focused on injuries involving the neck, head, arm, and legs. The most detailed testimony concerned the ligature furrow, its horizontal appearance, defined edges, associated abrasions, and bruising. Importantly, this excerpt does not contain a final ruling by the judge or a complete conclusion about the case. It ends with the court calling a recess to address scheduling with counsel. So the responsible takeaway is that this segment establishes forensic observations and terminology, while the broader meaning of those findings would depend on the remaining evidence and testimony. And that is exactly why courtroom evidence needs to be examined carefully rather than judged from a single dramatic moment. What do you think these findings mean in the context of the full case? If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping courtroom breakdowns.